we're talking about logistics here. So time matters. Like you need this multiplier to be at least 5 times, right? If you can be 5 times faster than the existing solutions, you're in a good spot. You want to go from next day or multi-day delivery to delivering within a few hours. And that's what we're doing today.
You're listening to the Drone Radio Show podcast, the show about drones and the people who use them for business, fun, and research. Hosted by Randy Goers.
Hello, everyone. This is Randy Goers, and welcome to the Drone Radio Show podcast, episode 451. What does it actually take to make autonomous cargo drones work at real-world scale? For that question, we head to Austin, Texas, to speak with Charles Acknin, co-founder and CEO of Skyways. Skyways is building unmanned aircraft systems designed to revolutionize autonomous cargo transportation. Unlike many competitors still in development, Skyways aircraft are operational today, carrying meaningful payloads over significant distances for both military and commercial customers. Based in Austin, Skyways is now shifting toward mass production of its autonomous aircraft, building confidence through real-world cargo missions that could ultimately enable future passenger applications. At Skyways, Charles leads the company's strategic vision and oversees operations, product development, and growth initiatives in autonomous aviation. Prior to Skyways, Charles co-founded and served as CEO of Elixir Labs. Before that, he was a senior software engineer at Google, where he worked on the company's search engine for nearly 5 years and spent a year advancing Google's mission of universal accessibility. Earlier in his career, Charles held engineering roles at Oracle, Cosworld Asia in Shanghai, and Amadeus. He also participated in Google Summer of Code, contributing to the open-source version control system Subversion. Charles holds a Master of Science in Software Engineering from Oxford Brookes University and a Master of Science in Computer Science from SupInfo. In this episode of the Drone Radio Show, Charles shares how Skyways is turning autonomous cargo drones from experimental technology into dependable, scalable logistics systems. Before we hear from Charles, I want to say that your support is the heartbeat of this podcast. Every episode is created with you in mind, and your generous donations help cover production costs and keep the show going. Whether it's the price of a cup of coffee or a larger contribution, every bit helps. You can donate at droneradioshow.com/donate. And if you enjoy the show, please subscribe on your favorite podcast platform and leave a review. It really helps the podcast stand out. If you have a great story about how drones are being used, I'd love to hear from you. You can reach me at randy@droneradioshow.com. So let's learn about unmanned cargo delivery systems with Charles Acknin of Skyways. Let's pick up the interview where I asked Charles to introduce himself.
So my name is Charles Acknin. I'm the CEO and founder at Skyways.
Charles, tell us about Skyways. What does the company do?
Our mission is to create a new form of transportation to advance our civilization. This is our core mission statement. So I started Skyways 9 years ago to address transportation and congestion issues. So it was really out of frustration with sitting in traffic in Silicon Valley. But we're starting with unmanned systems today, right? So our immediate goal is to build the largest fleet of unmanned autonomous aircraft. So that's what we're starting on. We're focused on the cargo drone use case now. And that can easily expand into other verticals to drive, higher utilization and better unit economics.
From your perspective, what makes Skyways unique in the autonomous cargo space?
So I think you can really break down the state of the industry into 4 phases. You've got prototyping and internal testing. Then after that, you move into the first paid flights with customers. Then after that, you moved into doing your first aircraft deliveries to customers. And then after that, you start really scaling and doing, fleets, deployment at scale with customers. And so most companies in our space are in phase one. It's really a lot of prototyping and internal testing. We're between phase three and phase four in the sense that, we did our first paid flight with customers in 2019. That was just about a year and a half into it after I started the company. We delivered our first aircraft to customers about a year later. Then after that, we started making more and more deliveries. So we learned the most from that phase because that's when you see your customers use the aircraft. That's when you see really, this is the acid test. You see what works and what doesn't work. And there's a really big difference then between, phase two and phase three because, phase two, you can still have your team, of engineers and technicians on the ramp doing pre-flight and, catching issues. It's essentially like a Formula One, car. You have your team there on the ramp getting it ready for flight, and you can still catch a lot of issues. So that's relatively easy. You can still make a lot of mistakes, and you catch them on the ground before you launch. But then after that, you go into, phase three, and it just needs to be much more reliable. You're basically, working towards handing off the aircraft to a customer. And, you might even be handing off the operations to the customer as well. So, you might still do remote support for a customer. The aircraft is, likely going to be connected to the internet. So you can still have some of your team members connected to the aircraft to make sure it's all good to go before they launch. But it becomes much more painful because you just don't have your eyes and your hands on the aircraft anymore. And so you really need at this point to increase reliability. And then after that, it keeps getting, steeper and steeper. You just need to keep driving towards better reliability. As you go into phase four, if you're doing large scale deployments, if you're talking, 40 drones, 100 drones, 200 drones, they can't be unreliable. So you really need to drive reliability past that. So I would say, for Skyways, luckily, because of how we started, in particular with defense and this approach to, iterative development, we got a little bit ahead of the game with respect to the rest of the industry in B2B. That's what we're focused on. And so we've passed phase three and now we're marching towards phase four, but you'd see most companies, essentially still doing a lot of internal testing.
Skyways has moved from successful demos to repeatable cargo missions. What was the biggest challenge in making those flights work every time?
I think it's a multi-dimensional challenge because, you are a frontier technology, number one. You're just breaking, trails. You are doing something that has not been done before, but you're doing all those things with hardware in a highly regulated environment, right? So it would be one thing to do all that in just pure software without having to actually build, real hardware and without a highly regulated environment. But you add those two things and they really compound. And so that makes it just very, very difficult. But also in the case of Skyways, the aircraft are not small. They're not Part 107 aircraft. Our V2 aircraft is 156 pounds all up weight. And our V3 aircraft is 360 pounds all up weight. So clearly uncharted, territory, really. You have to go into what's called FAA 44807. And it's really a lot of exemptions that you need. And so you need to do all that while you're, flying real hardware exposed to the elements. And, sometimes you show up and it's just a very, very windy day and you don't really have a choice. You're with the customer. You're going to go and fly, right? So that's what's really, really difficult in this industry. It's just, it is hardware that flies and it is highly regulated.
Tell us about the growth of the company since it started.
I started Skyways 9 years ago. And as I said, we focused exclusively on defense. And so, the government tends to move slow, but they move, surely. In the case of defense and unmanned systems, it seemed like a sure path that it was going to keep growing. And so again, if you think about, 2020, 2021, 2022, these were the phase two days for Skyways where we put an aircraft on military base or on a ship for the first time. And we started flying for our customers. We delivered those aircraft. And so, we were talking, contracts and approaching, $1 million. After that, we started, delivering aircraft, and we, left those aircraft behind essentially with the customers. And so those contracts grew, bigger and bigger, and we approached, the, multiple millions of dollars. And then more recently, we were awarded the largest StratFi contract of any drone company. So this is a $37 million US Air Force contract that we won last year. And so this is a US Air Force contract designed to take our V3 aircraft all the way into full rate production, right? And so again, I think it's all very much aligned with, what we are doing at Skyways, which is to move towards that phase 4 that we've talked about multiple times now, which is large scale deployments. And so in order to do that, you need to figure out FRP. This is full rate production.
Can you give us a sense of the physical scale of your aircraft, their size and operational footprint?
So at Skyways, we build VTOL fixed wing hybrid electric aircraft. Okay. So they take off and land vertically, but then after that, they transition to forward flight. And so because of that wing, the aircraft is relatively large. In the case of V2, it's 18 feet in wingspan. And in the case of V3, it's about 25 feet in wingspan. I talked about the all-up weight. Then in terms of range, in the case of V2, it's just over 450 miles in range with reserves. And in the case of V3, you're looking at over 1,000 miles with reserves. So those are aircraft that can fly for a long time. Again, V2 can fly for about 8 hours, and V3 can fly for almost a day nonstop. So they're large. They can fly for a long time. They can do, real missions. They're highly, highly capable aircraft.
Do your aircraft operate in the same airspace as traditional commercial aircraft?
We did a airport to airport flight back in July of last year. And we actually did that for about 2 weeks. And so it was 20 flights or so. And we did that over and over again to demonstrate repeatability of this. But basically, this was in North Dakota. And we would launch from Grand Forks Air Force Base and go north towards Space Cavalier, another base. And we would basically resupply that base that is really far up north. It's very close to Canada. There's really not much out there. And so we resupplied them with food, parts, anything that could fit in the aircraft, really. We would load it up and go. And we would basically transit through the national airspace. So it was all beyond visual line of sight. We would launch from Grand Forks. They have a radar system there, so they could track our aircraft and then the surrounding traffic. And that's how they maintained separation. And that's how we were able to implement 91-113, which is right-of-way detect and avoid.
And to be clear, you're operating completely unmanned, correct?
Yeah, we're still unmanned. So even though in the long term, we will be going into manned transportation, right now we're purely focused on unmanned, and that's what we've been doing since day one. So there's no pilot on board the aircraft.
How did working with the Department of Defense change your aircraft or autonomy in ways that directly improve Skyways' commercial readiness?
So we got our first contract with the DoD about 1 year after I started the company. So it's now 9 years ago. So we received our first purchase order for 2 aircraft with the Marine Corps at the time. And then after that, we started winning other DoD contracts, and we won a first US Navy contract. And that contract has become bigger and bigger over time. So essentially for the last 7+ years, that contract has provided a ton of traction for us within the DoD. And we've, essentially built a solution for ship-to-ship and ship-to-shore transportation within the Navy. And this is called Blue Water Logistics. And so, you operate in really rough environments. You are on a Navy ship. It could be a destroyer. It could be a resupply ship. That's a military sea lift command. It could be an aircraft carrier. But nonetheless, it's always very, very harsh. You're exposed to, salt spray water. It's almost always very windy on a ship. The ship is making its own wind, obviously. And so you're going to be flying in a highly dynamic environment where really the slightest mistake might cost you the aircraft, right? And so What that did for us was that we really had to pay close attention to, those elements. We had to build an aircraft that was not going to, corrode after, 2 days being, on the deck of a ship. So we had to basically revisit, the metallics that were, installed on board the aircraft and basically protect those. The same thing for the engine and just about anything, including our avionics, wiring harnesses, connectors. So it took us a few years to get it to something reasonable that just wasn't breaking all the time. But what we ended up with was an aircraft that was just like a lot more reliable than if we had just not been flying on ships. So it has provided a ton of traction for us because, as you know, the Department of Defense has a lot of funding to allocate towards those unmanned systems, very deep pockets, obviously, but also a very strong interest in flying those autonomous unmanned systems in places that are hard to reach or even places that have an element of risk to people. So there was really a good fit between a customer that has a pain point, a customer that doesn't have the kind of the regulatory issues that we talked about. I mean, you still have to follow a lot of the regulations within the DoD, but it's really not as heavy as within the FAA because the scope is narrower. And then you have a customer that has very deep pockets for those projects.
You've mentioned having staff who work with customers and support mission operations. Is the long-term goal for customers, including defense organizations, to own and operate the aircraft themselves?
So there's a bit of both. It depends on who you talk to within the DoD. There are customers that are interested in buying the aircraft and operating the aircraft, and we've done this. And there are other customers that are interested in just the service. They just want the results. So if we're talking about transportation, they just want you to move, something, a part, a spare part, a piece of electronic, maybe MRE from A to B. And that's what they pay for. They pay for the results, not so much the aircraft. So it really depends on who you work with within the DoD, but we're actually also seeing this with our industrial and commercial customers. Some of them want to fly the aircraft and they want to buy. Some of them want to fly, but they want to lease the aircraft. And some of them, again, just want the result.
And even when aircraft are flying ship to ship or base to base, the operator can be located remotely, correct?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, for now, we still have 2 people on the deck of the ship for, safety purposes. But yes, you're right. Once it launches, I mean, even on the ground, just, during pre-flight, it is connected to the cloud. It is connected to a satellite backend that provides internet connectivity. And so we do have our team here based in Austin connected to the aircraft even before it launches and then, of course, what it flies.
At what point does autonomous cargo clearly beat traditional logistics? What distances, routes, or use cases make it unavoidable?
We're talking about logistics here. So, time matters. Like you need this multiplier to be at least 5 times, right? If you can be 5 times faster than the existing solutions, you're like in a good spot. And, the faster, the better. You want to go from next day or multi-day delivery to, delivering within a few hours, right? So that's the goal, certainly. And that's what we're doing today. In some cases, they do like, same day. It might take them a few hours, call it, 3 hours, but we're able to do it within, less than an hour. We've done a mission like this in the Baltic Sea in Europe, where we delivered parts to an offshore wind turbine. And so the way it's done today is that they need to commission a ship to go to the turbine. And a ship doesn't move very fast, right? So if the turbine is, 16 nautical miles away, it's going to take, easily hours and hours and hours to get there. Well, we fly at, 55 knots. It's going to take us an hour to get there, right? And so we can do those missions just much faster than the existing solutions. And time is, the number one metric that our customers care about. So then there's cost always, right? But I would say that what we've seen from our customers, both on the B2B side of things and B2G with the government, customers are willing to pay the price to get things delivered faster.
Does autonomous cargo work in urban environments?
Again, because it's frontier, because it's new, I don't think that you want to start in urban environments. I think you really want to start in rural areas. First, you want to demonstrate this technology to the public. This is something that a lot of other companies underestimate. You think that you build the aircraft and then the day you can start flying, finally the market will open up. But no, actually, it's the beginning of your problems because now you need to figure out, where to fly, under what regulations. You need to run into those issues of, reliability. But yeah, what we've seen is that it truly, truly matters where you start. And in the case of Skyways, you've heard me talk about this. Like we fly a lot over water. It turns out there's just not a lot of people that are, in the water. So you want to start far away from people to demonstrate this technology and to get, people to be more comfortable with adopting this technology to then one day come and fly over densely populated areas. But the good news is that there are other companies in the B2C space, so delivering small things like, toothpaste or food that are doing it in, short range and urban environments. So it's very, very promising to see operations at scale doing this, but again, with much smaller aircraft than what we fly today.
Many companies talk about scaling. From your experience, what's harder to scale? Building the aircraft, managing autonomy across a fleet, or integrating safely into airspace? And which one do most companies underestimate?
I think most companies make the mistake to think that, building the aircraft is the hardest thing. But I think really it's all of the above. Like it's not, 80, 10, 10, percent. It's really, closer to, a third, a third, a third, right? You need to do all of those things right in order to be able to scale. I would even go as far as to say that the building the aircraft might be even smaller than a third. Like actually increasing, the level of autonomy, which is tightly coupled to reliability, is extremely difficult. And again, as you go into those phases that I described, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4, you have to increase reliability. There's no other way. If you don't do that, you simply cannot scale, period. And so that's very difficult. That's, a bit more than a third maybe for the autonomy. And then for integrating into the airspace, because it's frontier tech, because the rules are not written yet, at least not completely, you're seeing it with Part 108 these days. That is also really, really hard, right? Especially with a team that is just highly technical, that doesn't have, experience with, working with regulators. That can be a challenge. So I would say, all three, and probably a little less for, the building the aircraft and a little more for the autonomy and the, safely integrating into the airspace.
2 years from now, what would tell you Skyways is truly succeeding? What looks meaningfully different from today?
That would be large-scale deployment. It's really that phase 4 that I described. If you're just flying, 10 aircraft, every day at the scale of the planet, it's not going to move the needle. And so you really need to focus on those large-scale deployments in the long term. And so for Skyways in 2 years, from now, it would mean to have, maybe an order of magnitude more aircraft than what we have today. And we have aircraft right now deployed on 3 different continents, flying with customers. But, maybe it would be more continents and it would be just more aircraft and more flights. An aircraft that's in the air is an aircraft that's making money. An aircraft that's on the ground is an aircraft that's costing money. And so it's one thing to have, aircraft deployed around the world, but you want to keep them also in the air. You want to drive high utilization, right? So you also need to, figure out if you're going to deploy, let's say, 50 aircraft at a given site on the other side of the world, you also need to figure out how you're going to keep the aircraft up in the air and flying. And so you want to aim for, 60%, 70%, 80% utilization. And I mean, over a basis of 24 hours. And so you have to be able to fly at night. You have to be able to, rotate your operators. I don't necessarily mean that, you have one operator per aircraft, but you're going to have humans involved nonetheless, right? So it would be to have large scale deployments. That would be a world where, Skyways has succeeded.
How has the regulatory, political, and economic environment in the United States aligned to support your direction? Are there any headwinds you're watching?
I think there are tailwinds, if anything. When I started the company, we immediately focused on defense customers. But at the time, and, we're a startup, At the time, defense was not as hot as it is today. And it became hot because of, the global, context really. So that's definitely a tailwind. Nowadays, I think if you pitch a defense, company to investors, you're much more likely to at least get to the end of the meeting as opposed to, somebody just hanging up the phone on you just because you talked about, working with the government. But then you also have a bunch of other things. I mean, I think you do have regulations right now that we're starting to see just get unlocked. I think, Part 108, it seems to be going in the right direction of essentially streamlining what are exemptions today, right? And so instead of every company, every flight, every use case they do being an exemption, they're trying to streamline this with Part 108. So it's great to see that. But then on top of it all, we talked about the autonomy, and you're seeing AI tailwinds to write code those days, right? So that's much faster. You can have AI agents really help you build that autonomy stack much faster than you would, even a year and a half ago. So no, we're seeing more tailwinds than headwinds.
What advice do you have for other entrepreneurs trying to build companies in this space?
I would say pick something that you're really, really passionate about, because the road ahead is very rough to start a company. And so I think if you're not passionate about it, it's going to be easier to give up, right? And so the second advice is, don't give up, don't die. And it's easier said than done, obviously. But I think if you're really passionate about, the project that you're working on, you're just much better off than if you're just interested about it because of, some, reason that you're not deeply, deeply connected with.
Looking back, was there a specific moment or realization that made you decide to start Skyways?
So I grew up in the south of France near Airbus headquarters. And so I've had a passion for aviation for a long, long time. My father and we would build, RC planes, we're talking, balsa woods, small servos and those big batteries. And we would take those to the RC club over the weekend. And so I had a passion for aviation at an early age. And so that's kind of where it started for me. But I think, I really started to work on Skyways when I had enough of sitting in traffic and when I worked for big tech in Silicon Valley. And so I decided that I was going to take a stab at it and work on, addressing transportation challenges that our, civilization is facing. So for me, that was really the trigger where I already had a passion for aviation and I had a problem that I really wanted to fix.
What's next for Skyways?
I talked about V2 and V3. And so V2 is already out there flying with customers, and V3 is already flying. However, those are the prototypes that are flying. And so in 2026, you're going to see V3 deployed with customers. So it's going to be really interesting to see, even better capabilities flying with customers, increased reliability flying with customers. And yeah, that's what I'm most excited about with 2026. It's really, starting to move in the direction of having V3 deployed around the world with our customers. And so you'll see this happen in the next few months.
What regions or countries are you currently operating in commercially?
So we are in Germany and in UK and in Japan. And we're operating in those regions commercially, but then there are also some defense use cases in those regions.
In longer term, is it still your vision to move into passenger transportation as well?
Yeah, definitely. But that's really a long-term goal for Skyways, to get to people transportation. But we decided to take a different path than a lot of the, eVTOL, AAM companies that decided to go, straight into, so-called flying car project. We decided that, starting with unmanned was probably the safer and probably faster bet, by basically building a large fleet of unmanned aircraft, flying with customers, generating revenue. We were going to be able to build a foundation to then work on the manned program. And so you have to, think about Skyways in, let's say, 5 to 10 years from now, flying the largest, fleet of autonomous and unmanned aircraft in the world with a brand, now moving into, the manned transportation world. That sounds like a much better idea than, a company that, nobody has ever, heard about them, and now they have, kind of a flying car that is ready right around the corner. That sounds scary.
Are your aircraft manufactured in Austin or elsewhere?
Yeah, the aircraft's manufactured in Austin. It's mostly all here. We use, vendors and contractors that are spread out in the country. But yeah, we've grown the team recently. Just this last year, we went from 20 to 40 people. And so, with those contracts growing bigger and bigger, we just felt more comfortable, growing the team. And you're going to see, that growth continue into 2026 and the years to come.
And for my final question, Charles, what message would you like to leave regarding the future of the drone industry?
I think in general, I'm super excited about where the industry is at, where, Skyways is at. You can think of, the kind of the drone industry. It feels like we're in the second wave now. The first wave, I want to call it, that was almost like just before I started Skyways, I want to say the maybe airware days and, 2014, 2015, 10 years ago. And then after that, I think the second wave, maybe started, I want to say in, 2020, 2021. And so you have companies like Skyways that are part of that second wave. And now we're starting to see, just multiple things converge. And I talked about those things. I talked about, defense tech, making hardware exciting again. I talked about, Part 108, being on the horizon. And so, what's really interesting is that you're starting to see some B2C companies in the, cargo, drone space already with large scale deployments, including not far from where we are here in Texas. So that's very exciting. And essentially where we are focused on B2B. So we are focused on commercial customers. And so I just couldn't be more excited to have like Skyways where we are today with all this growth and those converging factors happening all at the same time. It definitely feels like, the perfect storm in a good way.
That's it for episode 451 of the Drone Radio Show. I hope you enjoyed hearing from Charles Acknin of Skyways. I want to thank Charles for taking the time to speak with me. To learn more about Skyways or to connect with Charles, visit skyways.com. If you enjoy the Drone Radio Show, please subscribe, share the podcast, and leave a review on Apple Podcasts. And if you're able to support the show, you can donate at droneradioshow.com/donate. And if you're able to support the show, you can donate at droneradioshow.com/donate. Thanks for listening. Your support truly means a lot, and I hope you'll tune in to future episodes of the Drone Radio Show to hear how drones are being used for business, fun, and research. For the Drone Radio Show, I'm Randy Goers.
This has been the Drone Radio Show podcast. More information on today's show can be found on our website at www.droneradioshow.com. If you're using drone technology for business, fun, or research and would like to share your experience on the show, please visit our website and fill out a guest appearance application. And don't forget to follow us on your favorite social media channels.